This is True Crime Arizona, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
It was the middle of July in Phoenix, Arizona, 1999. July is often Phoenicians' least favorite month of the year in the oppressive desert heat. But July 17th was Chris Eberle's new favorite day of the year.
It was literally the best day of my life. He weighed 9 pounds, he was 22 inches, golden hair.
Joshua Eberle Martinson, her first and only son, born to her and boyfriend Joshua Martinson. The couple was smitten by their little boy, who as he grew had bleach blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a big old grin and laugh.
He just had the brightest smile, the most ginormous smile. And most of my friends' memories of him are his smile, that would light up a room. I called him my Joshy Sunshine, because it just was like sunshine.
Joshy Sunshine, as his mom called him, started to find things he loved that he would share with his mom, proudly.
He liked making Lego creations and was so proud of, the Lego creations he was making. He loved Egypt, and we tried to figure out how that started, but he absolutely loved everything about Egypt. He could use all of the big words, like hieroglyphs, obelisk, he knew all of the different pyramids. He was a beautiful little boy, and as he got older, he is just a little boy that loved life and loved everything about it and everyone in it, and everyone was his friend. We would walk into a park or somewhere, and there'd be a group of kids, and he'd say, "Mom, my friends are here." People we'd never seen, so he was really compassionate. He was excited about, like I said, everything. Just, what are we going to do today, Mom? Where are we going? Who are we going to see?
By the end of summer 2004, Josh had just turned 5 years old. His 5th birthday party theme? Egypt, of course. Chris made him a pyramid cake. He celebrated with friends and was getting ready to take on a new challenge, kindergarten. He had only been in school a couple weeks in late August, but he was thriving both academically and socially. Chris dropped Josh off at school on Friday, unaware that what seemed to be a cute interaction between she and her son would become one of the last cherished memories she'd have with him.
I remember the last day, Friday, that I took him to school. And he was excited because he had learned something new on the playground. And he wanted to show me, but it was pretty crowded. There's a bunch of kids. And he's like, oh, he was a little shy. And he's like, okay. I was like, okay, we'll do it, next time. Maybe when, next week, or we'll come when the kids aren't here. And it just that morning, because they usually play a little bit before they go in, and I was turning to leave. He's like, Mom, wait, Mom, wait. So I went back, and that happened 3 times. And finally I was like, I gotta go, buddy. But he just kept calling me back that day. And at the end of the day, he came running out and gave me this bear hug and almost knocked me over. And one of the parents nearby, she's like, has he never been away from you before? So, which he obviously had. But as he said, Mom, how long was I gone? And I was like, 2.5 hours. He's like, that was so long. That memory of the last day that he was there was just, it's kind of hard to remember.
What would end up happening to Joshua came after a tumultuous love story and relationship between Chris and Jeff. It began in 1998, as innocent as could be, a bond over music.
We met at a concert. It was a festival in Chandler. I was there mostly to see Edwin McCain. And Jeff was there as well, and just noticed each other. He also knew all the words and was singing along. I'm like, oh, he's this guy, he knows who Edwin McCain is. That's really cool. We ended up talking. I was with some friends, and he ended up coming out with us after.
The two hit it off right away and quickly began a serious relationship.
I really liked him. It's so hard to say that without adding in, yes, there were some red flags, and I thought, he told me this sob story about his childhood, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have such a close, amazing family. I can show you what an amazing family's like. And he said he'd stopped going to church. I'm like, I'm really involved in my church. Like, I'll be able to show him what, help him come back to God and find a church home.
Chris thought she could be the one to make things better. But she remembers he would say some odd comments to her that not only didn't make sense, but were unsettling. She specifically remembers a conversation after camping up north.
We pulled over on the side of the road to take pictures, and he made some kind of comment like, oh, what would happen if you fell off that rock? And there was nothing behind me, and I thought, that's a weird thing to say.
She let the comments go, in part because the couple found out they were pregnant with Josh. After he was born, things were good for a bit.
I had seen good things in Jeff, and I wanted to believe that was who he could be.
But Chris said the comments continued, the verbal abuse and angry episodes with Jeff that became scary. So she would leave and go home to North Carolina, but always came back.
I learned later about the whole cycle of abuse and of domestic violence and stuff.
Things got really bad in the year 2000. Chris said verbal abuse turned to physical abuse. Recalling the terrifying September night, it all came to a head.
He's trying to throw me out of the house, telling me you're gone, you're fucking gone, you're done here. I'm like, Jeff, what's going on? What's going on? He grabbed my arm, took the phone, threw it on the ground. But his own cousin comes and ends up helping me get out of the house later. We wound up on the floor and he was choking me. I thought, oh my God, this is it. But at least people are gonna know and Josh is gonna be safe. And for whatever reason, he got up. And he pushed me out of the garage again, and I was like, I'm like, if I go back in there, he's gonna kill me. So,
in that moment, did you feel like you were ready to die if that meant Josh was going to be safe?
I'm sorry, Fiona.
It's okay.
Yes, but yes.
Jeff was arrested that night for assault and resisting arrest, but he ended up walking out of jail because Chris convinced herself she was okay, even if she wasn't.
I'm not injured enough to go to the ER. It's not bad enough. This isn't bad enough. I don't have a black eye. They're not going to believe me. Because no one contacted me, I wasn't involved in any way. They dropped the assault charge and left it as he pled to resisting arrest.
That's when Chris got the first order of protection against Jeff for both her and Josh. She renewed it each year, and there were no visitations allowed for a while. But as Josh got older, she hoped Jeff would change. In court, visitations were allowed again. Chris wanted Josh to have his dad in his life.
I never didn't want Josh to have a dad. That was a theme of their thought, that I was trying to cut Jeff out of Josh's life. I wanted Jeff to be able to be a good dad. I wanted him to be healthy and to treat Josh well and be capable of managing anger and not having irrational expectations for this child.
Chris said history repeated itself, though. Jeff struggled with anger, and soon the court ordered he couldn't be within a certain distance from Chris. She said she felt Josh started to be used as a pawn by Jeff, and he would ignore the legal orders in place.
He yells at me that if I want my son back, I better open the door.
As things continued to sour, they had a family court date in late August of 2004, and a judge changed the order of protection to much stricter guidelines in Chris's favor.
He kept mine in place and added, I feel like he made the restrictions stronger than what I'd even put on there. It was zero communication at all. Even though we were supposed to be able to have contact for exchanges, he said zero contact, zero communication. He has to stay away from you.
The judge went a step further for Josh Martinson.
He recommended that he do domestic violence screening and or counseling. And I thought, thank God somebody is finally seeing this. Thank God. People are finally starting to get it.
A few days later, Josh was to go to his dad's for the weekend. With this new arrangement, a friend of Chris's would walk Josh to his dad's car or apartment, since there was to be zero contact between Chris and Jeff during the exchanges. But on this Friday, 5-year-old Josh begged his mom to hold his hand and walk him to his dad's car. So Chris walked as far as she could legally go.
I bent down, I said, Josh, buddy, you're gonna have to go by yourself the rest of the way. Okay? And I gave him a kiss and a hug. I said, I love you and I'll see you soon. And so he went the rest of the way by himself. And Jeff pulled him in the driver's side. Pulled him into the truck. And that's the last time I saw him.
A family court advisor was recommending supervised exchanges going forward, and that was something Jeff was going to have to pay for. While Josh was at his dad's, Chris received a letter in the mail, Saturday, August 28th. It was from Jeff. He was angry and didn't want to pay for supervised visits. He said he couldn't afford it.
I thought, God damn it. Josh is with Jeff. I hope Jeff doesn't take this out on him.
That next day, Sunday, Jeff and Josh were supposed to meet Chris at a nearby Circle K for the exchange. They didn't show up.
I'm like, I know this person. He'll show up 20 minutes late to every exchange, but he'll show up. Like, this is not normal. Something's wrong.
Chris didn't know where Jeff's Ahwatukee apartment was because they couldn't be near each other, so she called 911 and was escorted there. Jeff's truck was in its parking space. Chris said police told her maybe they were at the pool. She was adamant. Something was wrong. A neighbor ended up telling Phoenix police a conversation she had just had with Jeff. Jeff told her about the letter, saying he would need to pay for supervised visits and how he didn't want to have to pay to see his son. The neighbor told police Jeff seemed upset and that he texted her later that night saying, "We loved you, we'll miss you." That was an ominous text, to say the least. Nobody was answering the door at his apartment, but they found the back sliding door unlatched. Police told Chris to get back as they entered. Chris recalled quickly after more and more police cars speeding in with their lights on.
And I kept asking everybody, I'm like, is Josh okay? Is Josh okay? What's happening? What's happening? Where's my son? What's happening? Is he okay? Nobody would answer or tell me anything, and I thought, God, I've been in there too long. But I did not want to believe he was gone. I was not going to believe it. I was like, maybe he's still okay. Maybe he's still okay. And then someone came to me and turned me to the side and said, they're bringing Jeff out now. And they pushed me away and had me turn my back because they brought Jeff Martinson out on a stretcher. And I was saying, where's Josh? Where's Josh? Let me go in there. Can I go in there? And I finally got an officer to tell me, and I've never forgotten this because I've never forgotten it. And I said, where's my son? And he said, I'm sorry to tell you he's gone. And I just broke down, screaming on the ground.
Police say they found Josh Eberle Martinson dead in his bunk bed in one room and found Jeff Martinson passed out in the other bedroom from an apparent suicide attempt with some cuts on his wrists, empty prescription bottles, plastic bags, and liquor. But how did Joshua die?
Somebody had said it looks like he was overdosed.
The autopsy appearing to confirm that. This clip is from one of our old newscasts.
The coroner determining the cause of death, an overdose of muscle relaxant.
Muscle relaxant? That was found to be a drug called Soma.
It's my opinion and my belief that I'm not surprised that there was some type of overdose. I would have guessed maybe children's medication or something. The fact that it was an adult medication, that's something I would expect Jeff to do, somehow get that into Josh's system, force him to take it. because he wasn't the kind of person that would break a bone or punch you and give you a black eye that people could see. The things he did were harder to detect.
But things got a bit murky. It would be discussed during the first trial, but the medical examiner eventually ruled the death as an overdose of muscle relaxants with the possibility of asphyxiation as a factor too.
He was potentially smothered or suffocated. I mean, Jeff choked me.
There was never a concrete answer, and still isn't. It was a 7-year wait for the first trial to begin after much delay. The trial was months long, grueling, and emotional, but an outcome Chris Eberle had hoped and prayed for.
The first trial was a guilty verdict. Guilty of first degree, and it was a death penalty case at that point.
Jurors then went into the deliberation phase of sentencing to consider whether they wanted a life in prison sentence or the death penalty.
They came back a hung jury. They couldn't decide. They couldn't agree.
Chris says they were told they would find a new jury to hear mitigation, but keep the verdict in place. But then, claims of juror misconduct.
It was like a year and a half later, I get a call at 11 o'clock at night that I needed to go get another order of protection because the judge had thrown the case out with prosecutorial misconduct. And that Jeff was going to walk into jail.
At the time, in 2013, Jeff Martinson's defense attorney, Michael Tarabeel, spoke about it on camera.
I just was dumbfounded. Like, never in my wildest dreams did I think that was going to happen. No one said that this is an option or a potentiality.
It was a terrifying reality for Chris Eberle. She learned to live with the pain. Then years later, in 2018, the charges were refiled while Jeff Martinson was living in Wisconsin. There would be a second trial. Chris was hopeful, but would have to testify all over again. The verdict this time, much different. Negligent homicide with a 2.5-year prison sentence. But because he had already served more time in prison, Jeff Martinson was free. Chris was told the jurors were 11-1 in favor of a harsher conviction, but that one juror did not agree.
And I think they thought, as jurors, they'd spent 3.5 months of their lives. I feel like they thought it was their job to come up. They had to come up with a verdict, even if they had to compromise down. And my thought going into it was like, if at least one person believes that he did what he did, there's no way they're going to compromise. So to learn that 11 people did is devastating. And to learn that one person can totally change the outcome from life in prison that is what was deserved and what would have been justice for Josh to 2.5 years, and he's walking out with time served. I don't think they knew that.
Chris says she struggled with something in both trials, what she was and wasn't allowed to say while on the stand.
To be honest, I don't know why any of these rulings, what they were based on, that I couldn't say. We couldn't say. No one could hear about the details of domestic violence, of why the orders of protection were in place, of how they were violated, of like none of that was allowed in the trial. And to me, that was stifling, like what actually happened. What about my calls to CPS? Not allowed in because they were CPS found them unsubstantiated. Well, guess how many children have died because of unsubstantiated CPS reports?
I went through some court documents to see what was discussed back and forth between the state and the defense on that. The defense seems to point to Rule 403, which basically says evidence can be excluded in a trial if it's outweighed by unfair prejudice, misleading the jury, confusion, or wasting time. The documents showed the defense tried to argue much of witnesses' testimony about Jeff and Chris as a couple was hearsay and offered improper opinion. I made contact with Jeff Martinson's family, his sister specifically. I wanted to get his side of this story, now that he's a free man. In fact, his sister was adamant I talk to him. So I tried. But in the end, Jeff Martinson did not want to give an interview and instead had his sister point me in the direction of the defense sentencing memorandum. It's important to note that in sentencing, victim impact statements could be written to the judge from family, friends, and people who knew Josh and Chris and Jeff. You don't see letters in every case, but you do in some. What you don't normally see is a situation like this. About 50 letters, 50, were written to the judge in support of Chris Eberle and little Josh. It was an incredibly high amount, many of them calling for the longest and toughest sentence the judge could give Jeff Martinson. The part that Jeff wanted me to relay in this story is this, quote, Miss Eberle and Mr. Martinson have both suffered the heartbreaking loss of their only son. While Mr. Martinson does not wish to turn this sentencing into another trial, it is important to note that much of the accusations made by Miss Eberle in her victim impact letter, as well as other letters submitted, are untrue, unproven, and libelous. Although Miss Eberle clearly blames Mr. Martinson for intentionally killing their son, Mr. Martinson has always maintained that he never intentionally hurt their son. Ultimately, the jury's verdict agreed with Mr. Martinson. End quote.
I'm going to think about him all day, every single day. He's literally everything that I do.
Chris Eberle never had any more children. Josh was her one and only.
The only way I've gotten through any of it is just obviously faith in God and all of my friends and support.
Every day, she actively has to try to power through the anger and what she feels is incredible injustice.
I choose, and I have to choose, to lock that away in order to be able to survive.
Not all was taken from her, though. Josh's spirit has never left her.
Yoga is something Josh loved also.
He learned it in preschool. At the time, it wasn't really Chris's thing. Fast forward to after his death, she got her yoga certification to teach.
I never practiced it myself until probably a couple years after he was killed, when people were encouraging me to come to classes. So my workshop that I offer is learning to breathe again, using yoga and meditation, just when you're in intense grief and going through trials. So I'm helping people that way. And I realized it helped me so much, just heal and get centered and be able to calm my mind. And so that's what I want. That's why I wanted to get my teaching certificate, was to give that back to people.
She donates to several different domestic violence organizations, now dedicated to helping other families.
I'm really involved with grief organizations. I've served on boards for a couple organizations. I go to the conferences. I actually do workshops now to help other people on the journey.
Joshua Eberle Martinson would be in his mid-20s today, but he'll be forever 5 in the hearts of those who knew him and loved him. The grief of a nearly 2-decade-long fight is outweighed by one thing: a mother's love for her son.
18 years of going through trials, of waiting, of delays, and that we do have victims' rights, but defendants' rights trump them. I just would hope that no other family has to go through this long of waiting, but in Josh's memory, that no other child has to experience what he experienced, because people will listen before it's too late.
This is True Crime Arizona, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
True Crime Arizona, the podcast, is hosted by me, Brianna Whitney, and produced by Sergio Hernandez. It's a production of Arizona's Family, 3TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.
This is True Crime Arizona, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.